Jake Matthews stared at the massive shape on the radar screen. The thing was huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built. It looked like a city floating in space, with sharp edges and strange lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Captain Carter, you need to see this," Jake called out. His voice was steady, but his hands shook a little as he pointed at the screen. Lisa Carter walked over to Jake's station on the bridge of the horizon's edge. She was a good captain, smart and brave. But even she went quiet when she saw what Jake had found. "How big is that thing?" she asked. Jake checked his numbers twice. "About 50 miles long, Captain. Maybe more. And there are smaller ships around it. Lots of them." The Horizon's Edge was Earth's newest exploration ship. It was fast and had good sensors, but it was not built for fighting. Jake was the ship's language expert. He knew how to talk to new alien races, or at least he hoped he did. This would be his first real test. "Send them a message," Captain Carter said. "Use the standard first contact protocol. Tell them we come in peace." Jake's fingers moved across his keyboard. He sent out radio signals in different languages and math patterns. These signals were designed to show that humans were smart and friendly. He waited for an answer. The answer came fast. 2 fast, bright energy beams shot out from the alien ship. They hit the horizon's edge and made the whole ship shake. The lights went out for a second, then came back on dim and red. "Shields down to 40%, someone yelled. "They're jamming our engines." Called out another crew member. Captain Carter grabbed the ship's radio. "This is Captain Lisa Carter of the Earthship Horizon's Edge. We are peaceful explorers. Please stop shooting at us." But the aliens kept shooting. More beams hit the ship. Jake felt the deck shake under his feet. Sparks flew from broken computers. Around the bridge. "Captain, they're coming alongside us," Jake said. He could see the alien ships getting closer on his screen. They were sleek and deadly looking, like metal sharks in space. A loud bang echoed through the ship, then another. The aliens were forcing their way inside. "All crew, prepare to repel boarders," Captain Carter said into her radio. But Jake knew. It was hopeless. The crew of the Horizon's Edge were scientists and explorers, not soldiers. They had some basic weapons, but nothing like what these aliens probably had. The bridge doors exploded inward. Smoke filled the air. Through the smoke came the aliens. Jake had never seen anything like them. They were tall, maybe 7 feet high. Their skin looked like crystal that changed colors in the light. They had 4 arms and moved like dancers, smooth and quick. But their weapons were very real. Energy rifles that hummed with power. The aliens. Spread out across the bridge. Their movements were perfect, like they had done this many times before. In seconds, they had control of everything. Captain Carter raised her hands. "We surrender. Please don't hurt my crew." One of the aliens, bigger than the others, made a sound. It was like music, but cold music. Jake's computer tried to translate it, but only got part of it. "Your surrender is noted," the alien said in broken English. "You will come with us." Jake watched in horror as the aliens forced the crew to their knees. Captain Carter tried to talk to them, to explain that humans were peaceful. But the big alien just looked at her with eyes like golden coins. "Peaceful?" the alien said. "Then you are weak." The alien raised its weapon. Jake wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Captain Carter was a good person. She didn't deserve this. The energy beam lit up the bridge for just a moment. When Jake could see again, Captain Carter was gone. Just gone. Other crew members tried to run or fight. It didn't matter. The aliens were too fast, too strong, too well armed. In minutes, most of Jake's friends were dead. The bridge smelled like earned electronics and worse things. Jake found himself on his knees with a few other survivors. His hands were behind his head. An alien stood behind him with a weapon pointed at his neck. "Take the survivors to the holding cells," the big alien said. "The Queen will want to see them." Jake and 5 other humans were pushed through the corridors of their own ship. Everything was different now. Alien soldiers were everywhere. Strange equipment was being installed in place of human technology. They were loaded into a small alien ship. Jake tried to remember everything he could see. The aliens' language, their technology, the way they acted. If he lived through this, Earth would need to know about these creatures. The alien ship was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The walls seemed to glow from inside. The engines made no sound, but Jake could feel them through the floor. Everything was smooth and curved, like it had been grown instead of built. They flew to the huge mothership Jake had seen on his screens. Up close, it was even more amazing. Cities could fit inside this thing. Maybe whole countries inside the alien ship. Jake and the other survivors were separated. He was taken down long halls filled with strange art and weapons from different worlds. This was not the first planet these aliens had conquered. Finally, they brought him to his room with a high ceiling. The walls were covered in what looked like living crystal that changed colors as he watched. At the far end of the room was a throne made from the same crystal. On the throne sat the most beautiful and terrifying creature Jake had ever seen. She was like the other aliens, but bigger and more graceful. Her crystal skin was pure white, with veins of gold running through it. She wore a crown that seemed to be made of captured starlight. Her 4 arms were decorated with jewelry that probably cost more than Earth's entire space program. This had to be the Queen. 2 alien guards pushed Jake forward until he was standing right in front of the throne. Every instinct told him to kneel, to bow, to show respect to this powerful being. But something inside him rebelled against the idea. His friends were dead. His ship was captured. Earth was in danger. And this Queen thought she could make him kneel just by being scary. Jake stood up straight. He looked the Queen right in her golden eyes. He would not bow to the creature who had ordered his friends killed. The Queen tilted her head like a curious bird. She studied Jake for a long moment. Then she made that musical sound again. But this time, Jake's computer translated it perfectly. Was laughing. "How cute," she said in perfect English. Her voice was like silver bells, but with an edge of ice. "This little creature thinks it can defy me." Jake felt anger rise in his chest. Cute? She thought he was cute? His friends were dead, and she thought it was amusing? But he said nothing. He just kept staring at her. 2 could play this game. The Queen seemed even more amused by his silence. She leaned forward on her throne. "I am Queen Velara of the Zephyrian Empire," she said. "We have conquered 47 star systems. Your pathetic little world will be number 48. Jake's heart pounded, but he kept his face calm. "My name is Jake Matthews," he said simply, "and Earth is not as pathetic as you think." "Queen." Velara laughed again. "Oh, you can speak. How delightful. Tell me, little Jake Matthews, what makes you think your dirtball planet can stand against the might of my empire?" Jake thought about Captain Carter, about his dead friends, about Earth so far away. "Because we don't give up," he said. "Ever." The Queen's golden eyes sparkled with something that might have been respect. Or maybe just more amusement. "You intrigue." Little human," she said. "My generals want me to kill you now, but I think I'll keep you instead. You'll be my pet. My little trophy from humanity's first defeat." She waved one of her hands. Guards stepped forward to take Jake away. "Take him to the guest quarters," Queen Velara said. The way she said guest made it clear he was still a prisoner. "Make sure he's comfortable. I want him healthy for the court ceremonies." As the guards led him away, Jake heard the Queen talking to her advisors. "Send word to the fleet commanders," she said. "We attack the human homeworld in 6 months. This Jake Matthews will have a front row seat to watch his species kneel before me." Jake said nothing, but inside he was already planning. 6 months. He had 6 months to find a way to save Earth. The alien queen thought he was cute. She had no idea what she had just done by keeping him alive. No idea at all. 3 weeks had passed since Jake became Queen Valara's pet. His quarters were nice enough, with a soft bed and good food. But the door was locked from the outside, and guards watched him all the time. Jake spent his days learning. He watched the aliens work and listened to them talk. His computer had been studying their language since the first attack. Now he could understand most of what they said, even when they didn't know he was listening. The aliens called themselves Zephyrans. Their empire was old and huge. They had been conquering other worlds for thousands of years. But Jake was learning something interesting about how their society worked. Everything was about rank. The crystal-skinned nobles gave orders. The darker-skinned workers followed them. Nobody was allowed to question anything. Nobody could suggest better ways to do things. If you were born a worker, you stayed a worker forever. Jake thought this was stupid. On Earth, good ideas could come from anyone. The best engineers often started as regular mechanics. The best scientists sometimes came from poor families. But the Zephyrians threw away most of their people's brains. One day, a young Zephyrian came to fix something in Jake's room. He was smaller than the warriors, with dark blue skin and only 2 arms. His name was Kess, and he was curious about Jake. "You are the human pet," Kess said in careful English. "The Queen says your people are weak." Jake was sitting at his small table, drawing pictures of Earth animals. "What do you think?" he asked. Kess looked confused. "I am not allowed to think about such things. I fix machines. That is all." "But you do think about them," Jake said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes." Kess glanced around to make sure nobody was listening. "How did humans build ships that fly between stars? Your technology is different from ours." Jake smiled. This was the opening he had been waiting for. "We think differently. When we have a problem, we ask everyone for ideas. The best idea wins, not the idea from the highest-ranked person." "That sounds ... wrong," Kess said, but he didn't sound sure. "Does it? Your cooling system in this room makes too much noise." "I bet you know how to fix it, but nobody asks you." Kess stared at him. "How did you know that?" "Because good engineers always see problems and think of solutions. It's what engineers do." Over the next few days, Kess visited Jake more often, always with good reasons, fixing things, bringing food, checking the air system. But really, he came to talk. Jake learned that Kess was very smart. He had ideas for making the ship's engines work better. He knew ways to fix things faster, but he was never allowed to share these ideas. If he tried, he would be punished for speaking above his rank. "It must be frustrating," Jake said one day. "I should not feel frustrated," Kess replied. "I should be happy with my place. But you're not." Kess was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "No, I am not." Jake started teaching Kess about human engineering. Simple things at first. How to make joints stronger. How to reduce friction in moving parts. How to solve problems by working backwards from what you wanted to achieve. Kess was a fast learner. More than that, he was excited to learn. Jake could see the young alien's confidence growing as he discovered that his ideas had value. Meanwhile, Jake was being called to the Queen's court more often. Queen Valara liked to show him off to visiting nobles from other ships. She would make him stand in front of everyone while she told stories about the weak humans who thought they could resist the Empire. Jake hated these sessions, but he used them to learn. He watched how the different nobles acted. He listened to their conversations. He started to understand the politics of the Zephyrian Empire. Not everyone was happy with Queen Valara's rule. Some of the nobles thought the empire was expanding too fast. They worried about managing so many conquered worlds. Others wanted to focus on making their existing territory better instead of always looking for new wars. But nobody dared say these things out loud. The queen had absolute power. Anyone who questioned her decisions could be executed. During one court session, a message arrived from Earth. It had taken weeks to reach them, traveling through space at the speed of light. Jake's heart jumped when he heard his own language being spoken. The message was from Dr. Amy Rogers, Earth's top scientist. Jake had worked with her before joining the space program. She was smart and brave, and hearing her voice made him feel less alone. To whoever receives this message, Dr. Rogers said, "We know you have captured our people. We want to negotiate for their safe return. We are willing to discuss terms." Queen Valara laughed when the message ended. How pathetic. They think they can bargain with me. But Jake noticed something. Some of the nobles looked uncomfortable. A few glanced at each other with worried expressions. They had heard something in Dr. Rogers' voice that the Queen had missed. Dr. Rogers didn't sound scared. She sounded determined. Back on Earth, Jake knew people were working. Dr. Rogers would be studying every piece of information they had about the Zephyrians. Commander Steve Johnson would be preparing Earth's defenses. They wouldn't give up without a fight. That night, Kes visited Jake's quarters again. This time, he brought another engineer with him. Her name was Nira, and she took care of the ship's life support systems. Kes told me about your ideas, Nira said nervously. About asking everyone for solutions. Jake nodded. What problems do you see with the life support? Nira looked around fearfully, then whispered, The air recycling system wastes 30% of its energy. I know how to fix it, but the chief engineer won't listen to me. He says I'm too young and too low-ranked. Show me, Jake said. Nira drew diagrams on Jake's table. Her solution was brilliant and simple. It would save energy and make the air cleaner for everyone on the ship. But because she was young and female and low-ranked, her ideas were ignored. Jake felt angry. These people were wasting so much talent. How many good ideas were thrown away because of their stupid rank system? Your solution is perfect, Jake told Nira. On my world, you would be promoted for thinking of something this good. Nira's eyes went wide. Really? Really? Smart ideas should be rewarded, no matter who thinks of them. Word started to spread quietly through the lower decks. The human pet was talking to engineers and technicians. He was listening to their ideas. He was treating them like their thoughts mattered. More workers started finding excuses to visit Jake's quarters. They came to fix imaginary problems or deliver unnecessary supplies. But really, they came to talk to someone who thought they were valuable. Jake learned about dozens of problems on the ship that could be easily fixed. He learned about workers who had brilliant ideas, but no way to share them. He learned about people who were tired of being treated like machines instead of thinking beings. But he also learned something else. The Zephyrian Empire was not as strong as it looked. Their rigid system made them slow to adapt. Their refusal to listen to new ideas meant they kept making the same mistakes over and over. One day, Kes brought Jake terrible news. The Queen is planning something big, he whispered. A massive attack on your homeworld. The whole fleet will move in 4 months. Jake's blood went cold. 4 months. That wasn't enough time for Earth to prepare a proper defense. Unless... Kes, Jake said carefully, How many people on this ship are unhappy with the way things work? Kes thought about it. Most of the workers. Many of the lower officers. Even some of the engineers who have rank. They see problems, but they can't fix them because of the rules. What if the rules could change? Kes stared at him. Change? But the rules have always been this way. The Queen would never allow it. What if it wasn't up to the Queen? Jake could see fear and hope fighting in Kes's eyes. You're talking about impossible things. Am I? You told me there are other fleets in the Empire. Other nobles who might have different ideas about how things should work. Jake had been watching the political games in the Queen's court. He had seen the looks that passed between certain nobles when the Queen made particularly harsh decisions. There were cracks in the Empire's unity. There are rumors, Kes said very quietly. Some say Duke Zoran of the Fourth Fleet thinks the Queen is too aggressive. Others whisper that Duchess Nissa of the Mining Guild wants to focus on building instead of destroying. Jake nodded. This was what he had hoped to hear. What if those people could talk to each other? What if they could talk to workers who have good ideas but no voice? That would be. Kes stopped. He couldn't even imagine such a thing. Revolutionary? Jake suggested. The word hung in the air between them. Revolutionary. It was a dangerous word in the Zephyrian Empire. People had been executed for less. But Jake could see the idea taking root in Kes's mind. And if it could take root in one mind, it could spread to others. The alien Queen still thought of Jake as her cute little pet. She had no idea that her pet was quietly teaching her people to think for themselves. She had no idea that in 4 months, when her fleet reached Earth, she might not have an empire left to command. 2 months had passed since Jake started talking to the ship's workers. What began with Kes and Nira had grown into something bigger. Word spread quietly through the lower decks that the human pet actually listened to people's ideas. Jake's quarters had become an unofficial meeting place. Workers would come to fix things that weren't broken, just to talk. They shared problems they saw and solutions they had thought of. For the first time in their lives, someone treated their thoughts as valuable. The changes started small. Nira's air recycling improvements were so good that even the chief engineer couldn't ignore them. When the ship's air became cleaner and fresher, people noticed. They started wondering what other good ideas were being ignored. Kes had suggested a way to make the engines run more efficiently. When Jake showed him how to present the idea properly, the engineering chief had to admit it was brilliant. The ship now moved faster while using less fuel. Other workers saw this and got excited. Maybe their ideas mattered too. Chief engineer Thane was a gruff old Zephyrian with gray-blue skin and scars from many battles. At first, he was suspicious of Jake, but when the human suggestions kept making his job easier, Thane started to listen more carefully. Your people think differently, Thane said one day when he visited Jake's quarters. On Zephyr, we learn one way to do things and never change. But you humans seem to always be looking for better ways. Jake nodded. We believe that good ideas can come from anywhere. The newest worker might see something that the oldest master missed. Thane scratched his chin thoughtfully. That goes against everything we were taught. But ... He paused, but it seems to work. Word of Jake's improvements began reaching other ships in the fleet. Engineers and technicians requested transfers to work on the Eternal Dominion, just to learn these new human methods. Queen Velara allowed the transfers, thinking it amusing that other ships wanted to study her pet. She had no idea she was helping. Jake built a network across the entire fleet. The real breakthrough came during a crisis. The ship's food growing systems started failing. Strange insects had gotten into the growing chambers and were eating all the crops. If the problem wasn't fixed quickly, thousands of crew members would go hungry. The agricultural specialists tried everything they knew, But nothing worked. The insects kept multiplying. People started to panic as food supplies ran low. Jake asked to see the growing chambers. The agricultural team was desperate enough to listen to anyone, even a human pet. When Jake saw the problem, he almost smiled. On Earth, farmers had dealt with similar pest problems for thousands of years. The solution was simple if you knew biology. You need natural predators, Jake explained to the head agriculturalist, a thin Zephyrian named Vex. These insects must have natural enemies. Find those enemies and let them eat the pests. Vex looked confused. But that would mean bringing more insects into our food supply. The right insects, Jake said patiently. Insects that eat the bad insects, but leave your crops alone. It took some searching, but they found the predator insects on the ships. Database of biological samples from conquered worlds. Within days, the pest problem was solved. The predator insects ate all the harmful ones, then died off naturally when their food source was gone. The crew was amazed. Instead of using poison or complicated technology, Jake had solved the problem by understanding how nature worked. The solution was elegant, cheap, and completely effective. More importantly, Jake had saved the ship from famine. Thousands of crew members owed their lives to the human pet's idea. News of this success spread through the fleet even faster than the engineering improvements had. Jake was no longer just the Queen's amusing trophy. He was becoming someone important. Workers from all over the ship started coming to him with problems. Not just technical problems, but social ones too. They talked about unfair treatment from their superiors. They shared frustrations about good ideas being ignored. They complained about the rigid rules that kept them from improving their lives. Jake listened to all of it. And slowly, carefully, he started planting new ideas. On Earth, he would say, "We believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." Or, "Where I come from, the best idea wins, no matter who thought of it." Or, "My people think that freedom and respect make workers more productive, not less." These ideas were revolutionary in Zephyrian society, but Jake presented them as simple facts about human culture, not as criticism of the Empire. This made them safer to discuss. Meanwhile, Jake was gathering intelligence about the fleet's politics. Through his conversations with workers, he learned which officers were fair and which were cruel. He discovered which nobles were popular and which were feared. He mapped out the complex relationships that held the Empire together. Most importantly, he confirmed what Kess had told him about the growing dissatisfaction among some of the fleet commanders. Duke Zoran of the Fourth Fleet was known for treating his workers better than most nobles. His ships were more efficient because his crews were happier. But he had to be careful not to seem too different from other commanders. Duchess Nissa controlled the mining guild, which supplied raw materials to the whole empire. She believed the empire was expanding too fast and ignoring important infrastructure problems. But questioning the Queen's expansion policy was dangerous. There were others too. Fleet Admiral Cray thought the military was becoming too focused on conquest and not enough on defense. General Mora believed the Empire's treatment of conquered peoples created unnecessary rebellions. All of these leaders had doubts about Queen Velara's aggressive policies, but they couldn't talk to each other openly about their concerns. The Queen's spy network was everywhere. Jake realized that if these dissatisfied nobles could somehow communicate with each other and with the reform-minded workers throughout the fleet, something significant might happen. But he needed to be very careful. One wrong move and he would be executed as a rebel leader. The opportunity came when Chief Engineer Thane mentioned that he would be attending a technical conference on Duke Zoran's flagship. Engineers from several ships would be sharing information about maintenance and upgrades. "Could you ask the Duke a question for me?" Jake asked casually. Thane looked suspicious. What kind of question? Jake had prepared for this moment. I've been thinking about the energy waste in our current engine configurations. If we could standardize some improvements across the fleet, we could save enormous amounts of fuel. But it would require cooperation between ships. It was a perfectly reasonable technical question, but Jake had phrased it carefully. The idea of cooperation between ships could mean many things. Thane took the question to Duke Zoran. A few days later, he returned with an interesting response. The Duke is very interested in your efficiency improvements, Thane reported. He wants to know if you have other ideas for ... cooperation. Jake's heart raced. Duke Zoran had understood the hidden meaning. He was willing to discuss more than just technical cooperation. Tell the Duke that I believe the Empire's greatest strength is its people, Jake said. But that strength is being wasted by outdated methods. A wise leader might find ways to unleash that potential. When Thane delivered this message, the response came back quickly. Duke Zoran wanted to meet with Jake personally. He would be visiting the Eternal Dominion in 2 weeks for a formal inspection. Jake spent those 2 weeks preparing. He compiled lists of the improvements that worker suggestions had made to the ship. He documented the problems that rigid hierarchy was causing throughout the fleet. He outlined a vision of what the Empire could become if it embraced change instead of fearing it. 2 months had passed since Jake started talking to the ship's workers. What began with Kess and Nira had grown into something bigger. Word spread quietly through the lower decks that the human pet actually listened to people's ideas. Jake's quarters had become an unofficial meeting place. Workers would come to fix things that weren't broken, just to talk. They shared problems they saw and solutions they had thought of. For the first time in their lives, someone treated their thoughts as valuable. The changes started small. Nira's air recycling improvements were so good that even the chief engineer couldn't ignore them. When the ship's air became cleaner and fresher, people noticed. They started wondering what other good ideas were being ignored. Kess had suggested a way to make the engines run more efficiently. When Jake showed him how to present the idea properly, the engineering chief had to admit it was brilliant. The ship now moved faster while using less fuel. Other workers saw this and got excited. Maybe their ideas mattered too. Chief engineer Thane was a gruff old Zephyrian with gray-blue skin and scars from many battles. At first, he was suspicious of Jake, but when the human suggestions kept making his job easier, Thane started to listen more carefully. Your people think differently, Thane said one day when he visited Jake's quarters. On Zephyr, we learn one way to do things and never change. But you humans seem to always be looking for better ways. Jake nodded. We believe that good ideas can come from anywhere. The newest worker might see something that the oldest master missed. Thane scratched his chin thoughtfully. That goes against everything we were taught. But ... He paused, but it seems to work. Word of Jake's improvements began reaching other ships in the fleet. Engineers and technicians requested transfers to work on the Eternal Dominion just to learn these new human methods. Queen Velara allowed the transfers, thinking it amusing that other ships wanted to study her pet. She had no idea she was helping Jake build a network across the entire fleet. The real breakthrough came during a crisis. The ship's food growing systems started failing. Strange insects had gotten into the growing chambers and were eating all the crops. If the problem wasn't fixed quickly, thousands of crew members would go hungry. The agricultural specialists tried everything they knew, but nothing worked. The insects kept multiplying. People started to panic as food supplies ran low. Jake asked to see the growing chambers. The agricultural team was desperate enough to listen to anyone, even a human pet. When Jake saw the problem, he almost smiled. On Earth, farmers had dealt with similar pest problems for thousands of years. The solution was simple if you knew biology. You need natural predators, Jake explained to the head agriculturalist, a thin Zephyrian named Vex. These insects must have natural enemies. Find those enemies and let them eat the pests. Vex looked confused. But that would mean bringing more insects into our food supply. The right insects, Jake said patiently. Insects that eat the bad insects, but leave your crops alone. It took some searching, but they found the predator insects on the ships. Database of biological samples from conquered worlds. Within days, the pest problem was solved. The predator insects ate all the harmful ones, then died off naturally when their food source was gone. The crew was amazed. Instead of using poison or complicated technology, Jake had solved the problem by understanding how nature worked. The solution was elegant, cheap, and completely effective. More importantly, Jake had saved the ship from famine. Thousands of crew members owed their lives to the human pet's idea. Of this success spread through the fleet even faster than the engineering improvements had. Jake was no longer just the Queen's amusing trophy. He was becoming someone important. Workers from all over the ship started coming to him with problems. Not just technical problems, but social ones too. They talked about unfair treatment from their superiors. They shared frustrations about good ideas being ignored. They complained about the rigid rules that kept them from improving their lives. Jake listened to all of it. And slowly, carefully, he started planting new ideas. On Earth, he would say, we believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Or, where I come from, the best idea wins, no matter who thought of it. Or, my people think that freedom and respect make workers more productive, not less. These ideas were revolutionary in Zephyrian society, but Jake presented them as simple facts about human culture, not as criticism of the Empire. This made them safer to discuss. Meanwhile, Jake was gathering intelligence about the fleet's politics. Through his conversations with workers, he learned which officers were fair and which were cruel. He discovered which nobles were popular and which were feared. He mapped out the complex relationships that held the Empire together. Most importantly, he confirmed what Kess had told him about the growing dissatisfaction among some of the fleet commanders. Zoran of the Fourth Fleet was known for treating his workers better than most nobles. His ships were more efficient because his crews were happier. But he had to be careful not to seem too different from other commanders. Duchess Nissa controlled the mining guild, which supplied raw materials to the whole empire. She believed the empire was expanding too fast and ignoring important infrastructure problems. But questioning the Queen's expansion policy was dangerous. There were others, too. Fleet Admiral Cray thought the military was becoming too focused on conquest and not enough on defense. General Laura believed the Empire's treatment of conquered peoples created unnecessary rebellions. All of these leaders had doubts about Queen Valara's aggressive policies, but they couldn't talk to each other openly about their concerns. The Queen's spy network was everywhere. Jake realized that if these dissatisfied nobles could somehow communicate with each other and with the reform-minded workers throughout the fleet, something significant might happen, but he needed to be very careful. One wrong move and he would be executed as a rebel leader. The opportunity came when Chief Engineer Thane mentioned that he would be attending a technical conference on Duke Zoran's flagship. Engineers from several ships would be sharing information about maintenance and upgrades. "Could you ask the Duke a question for me?" Jake asked casually. Thane looked suspicious. What kind of question? Jake had prepared for this moment. "I've been thinking about the energy waste in our current engine configurations. If we could standardize some improvements across the fleet, we could save enormous amounts of fuel. But it would require cooperation between ships. It was a perfectly reasonable technical question, but Jake had phrased it carefully. The idea of cooperation between ships could mean many things. Thane took the question to Duke Zoran. A few days later, he returned with an interesting response. "The Duke is very interested in your efficiency improvements," Thane reported. "He wants to know if you have other ideas for ... cooperation." Jake's heart raced. Duke Zoran had understood the hidden meaning. He was willing to discuss more than just technical cooperation. "Tell the Duke that I believe the Empire's greatest strength is its people," Jake said. "But that strength is being wasted by outdated methods. A wise leader might find ways to unleash that potential." When Thane delivered this message, the response came back quickly. Duke Zoran wanted to meet with Jake personally. He would be visiting the Eternal Dominion in 2 weeks for a formal inspection. Jake spent those 2 weeks preparing. He compiled lists of the improvements that worker suggestions had made to the ship. He documented the problems that rigid hierarchy was causing throughout the fleet. He outlined a vision of what the Empire could become if it embraced change instead of fearing it. Human forces. The third sign came from the communications center itself. Nira and her fellow technicians had learned how to route messages through the ship's internal network. Instead of relaying the Queen's orders to attack the human ships, they began broadcasting a different message. Jake's voice came over the ship's communication system. He had recorded the message weeks earlier, knowing that someday he might need to use it. "My fellow beings," his voice said in carefully learned Zephyrian, "for months you have shown me kindness and respect. You have shared your ideas and your hopes for a better future. Now that future is being decided." Throughout the ship, workers stopped what they were doing to listen. Many had never heard Jake speak their language before. "The human ships that have come here are not invaders," Jake continued. "They are rescuers. They came to bring me home, just as you had come for your own people. But they have also come to offer you something more important than victory or defeat. They have come to offer you a choice." In the Queen's throne room, alarms were screaming and lights were flashing. Reports were coming in from all over the ship about technical failures and communication breakdowns. But Queen Velara was beginning to understand that this was no accident. "Find that human," she screamed at her guards. "Bring him to me now." But Jake was no longer in his quarters. Kess and a dozen other workers had moved him to a secure location deep in the ship's engineering section. From there, he continued his broadcast. "You have a choice," Jake's voice echoed through the corridors. "You can continue to live in fear, following orders without question, watching your ideas be ignored and your talents wasted. Or you can choose to build something better, a society where everyone's voice matters, where good ideas are rewarded no matter who thinks of them, where respect and dignity are given to all beings, not just those born to high rank." The effect was immediate and dramatic. In engine rooms across the ship, workers began shutting down systems. In the weapons bays, technicians refused to load the big guns. In the fighter launch bays, pilots climbed out of their cockpits and walked away. The Eternal Dominion, flagship of the Zephyrian Empire, was being paralyzed by its own crew. But the revolution was spreading beyond just one ship. Jake's allies on other vessels had been waiting for this signal. Duke Zoran's Fourth Fleet suddenly stopped responding to the Queen's orders. Duchess Nisa's mining ships began moving to protect the human rescue vessels instead of attacking them. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, chaos reigned. Officers were shouting conflicting reports. Some ships were following orders, others were not. The carefully organized Zephyrian fleet was falling apart. "What is happening?" Queen Velara demanded. General Fox, her military advisor, looked grim. "It appears we are facing a coordinated rebellion, Your Majesty." The human has somehow convinced significant portions of our fleet to turn against us. Impossible. He's just one primitive creature. A primitive creature who spent 4 months learning our weaknesses, Thox replied. He has turned our own people against us. Queen Velara's golden eyes blazed with fury. Then we will remind them who rules here. Send word to all loyal ships. Any vessel that does not immediately attack the human fleet will be destroyed as traitors. But even this order met resistance. Many of the communication officers refused to send it. Others changed the wording to make it less threatening. The Queen's absolute authority was crumbling before her eyes. Meanwhile, Captain Mitchell was watching the battle with amazement. His small fleet had expected to fight desperately against overwhelming odds. Instead, the Zephyrian ships were fighting each other. Many of them were sending messages offering to help rescue the human prisoners. "Sir," Lieutenant Parker said, "we're receiving a transmission from someone claiming to be Jake Matthews. Put him through." Jake's voice came over the communication system, speaking English for the first time in months. "Ryan, is that you? I heard about your promotion to captain." Mitchell smiled despite the dangerous situation. "Jake, are you all right? Where are you?" "I'm fine, and I'm exactly where I need to be." "Ryan, listen carefully. This isn't just a rescue mission anymore. We have a chance to prevent a war between Earth and the Zephyrian Empire. But we need to move fast. What do you need us to do?" "Get ready to negotiate." In about 10 minutes, representatives from several Zephyrian fleets will want to talk about a peace treaty. They're tired of Queen Velara's aggressive policies, and they see this as a chance for change. Captain Mitchell looked around his bridge in confusion. "Jake, are you telling me you've started a civil war?" "I'm telling you, I've given them a choice. And many of them are choosing hope over fear." At that moment, Queen Velara herself entered the engineering section with a squad of her personal guards. They had blasted through security doors and forced their way past the workers who tried to stop them. Jake stood calmly in the center of the room, surrounded by dozens of Zephyrian engineers and technicians. They had formed a protective circle around him, and they weren't moving aside for anyone. "So," Queen Velara said, her voice dripping with cold fury, "my cute little pet has grown teeth." Jake met her gaze without flinching. "I told you once that humans don't give up. I also told you that we don't kneel to anyone. You have turned my own people against me." "I didn't turn them against you," Jake replied. "I showed them that they had a choice." "They turned against what?" "You represent fear, oppression, and waste of potential." The Queen raised her weapon, pointing it directly at Jake's chest. "And now I will show them what happens to those who choose rebellion." But as her finger tightened on the trigger, something unexpected happened. Chief Engineer Thane stepped forward, placing himself between Jake and the Queen's weapon. "Your Majesty," Thane said formally, "I must respectfully request that you reconsider." "Move aside, Engineer, or I will kill you too. Then you will have to kill me," Thane replied, "because this human has shown us what we could become. And that vision is worth dying for." One by one, other Zephyrians stepped forward. Kess and Nira moved to stand beside Thane. Vex came from the agricultural section. Dozens of workers and technicians formed a wall of bodies around Jake. Queen Velara stared at them in shock. These were her subjects, her property. They were supposed to obey her without question. How had one human changed everything so completely? "Stand down," came a new voice from behind the Queen. Duke Zoran entered the engineering bay with his own guards. Behind him came Duchess Nissa and Fleet Admiral Cray. 3 of the most powerful leaders in the Empire had come to confront their Queen. "This rebellion ends now," Queen Velara snarled. "All of you will kneel and beg forgiveness, or you will die." Duke Zoran shook his head sadly. "No, Velara, Your reign ends now. Too many of us have seen what this human offers. A better way forward. A way that doesn't require constant conquest and oppression. You forget who I am. We remember exactly who you are, Duchess Nissa said quietly. The question is whether you can remember who you could become. Jake stepped forward, moving past. The protective circle of workers. Queen Velara, you called me cute because you couldn't see me as a threat, but I was never trying to threaten you. I was trying to free your people, and that includes freeing you from the prison of absolute power. The queen's weapon trembled in her hands. Around her, she could see that even some of her own guards were wavering. The certainty that had ruled her empire for so long was crumbling. What? What do you want from me? She asked, and for the first time, she sounded vulnerable rather than commanding. Jake's answer would determine the fate of two civilizations. I want you to choose who you want to be. A tyrant who rules through fear, or a leader who guides through wisdom. The galaxy is changing, and you can change with it, or be left behind by it. Throughout the ship, throughout the fleet, thousands of beings waited to see what their queen would decide. The revolution had begun, but its outcome would depend on whether power could learn to share itself willingly. The alien queen who had once called Jake cute now faced the most important decision in the history of her empire. Queen Velara stood frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Her weapon was still pointed at Jake, but her golden eyes showed confusion and something that might have been fear. Around her, the people she had ruled with absolute authority were choosing to protect the human who had changed everything. Slowly, her arm lowered. The weapon fell from her trembling fingers and clattered on the metal floor. I don't understand, she whispered. How did one small human destroy my empire? Jake stepped closer, moving carefully so as not to frighten her. I didn't destroy it. Your Majesty, I tried to help it grow into something better. Better? Her voice was bitter. My empire ruled 47 star systems. We were feared across the galaxy. And how many of your subjects were happy? Jake asked gently. How many of them loved the empire instead of just fearing it? Queen Velara looked around at the faces surrounding her. These were her people, engineers, technicians, workers, even some of her nobles. But they weren't looking at her with the mixture of fear and worship she was used to. They were looking at her with something else. They pitied her. We don't have to be enemies, Jake continued. You could lead your people into a new age. An age where strength comes from cooperation instead of conquest. Where progress comes from innovation instead of oppression. And if I refuse? Duke Zorin answered before Jake could speak. And the empire will change without you. Too many of us have seen what's possible now. We won't go back to the old ways. The queen closed her eyes. When she opened them again, some of the hardness was gone. What would you have me do? Help us build something new, Jake said. A confederation instead of an empire. A partnership of worlds instead of a collection of conquered territories. The Zephyrian Confederation, Duchess Nissa added thoughtfully. It has a nice sound to it. Over the next few hours, everything changed. The immediate crisis was resolved when Queen Velara ordered her loyal ships to stand down. Captain Mitchell's rescue fleet was invited aboard the Eternal Dominion for negotiations instead of battle. Jake found himself in the strange position of mediating between two civilizations that had almost gone to war. But he had allies now. Beings from throughout the Zephyrian fleet who believed in the possibility of change. The negotiations took place in the Queen's throne room, but it was very different from Jake's first time there. Instead of one ruler giving orders to subjects, there was a round table where representatives from different factions could speak as equals. Captain Mitchell represented Earth. Duke Zorin spoke for the progressive nobles. Chief Engineer Thane represented the workers and technicians. Duchess Nissa advocated for the mining and trade guilds. Even Queen Velara had a voice, though she was no longer the only voice that mattered. "Let me understand this," Captain Mitchell said. "You're proposing to split the Zephyrian Empire in half?" "Not split," Jake explained. "Transform. Those systems that want to maintain the old imperial structure can do so. Those that want to try something new can form the Confederation. Both can exist peacefully. And the Queen agrees to this?" Queen Velara spoke for herself. "I am learning to see wisdom in compromise. Perhaps ruling through fear was easier. But it was not sustainable. The human has shown us that." Captain Mitchell looked at Jake with amazement. 4 months ago, you were a prisoner facing execution. Now you're restructuring an entire galactic empire? Jake shrugged. "I just listened to people and tried to help them solve their problems. It turns out that most problems can be solved if you let everyone contribute ideas." The formal ceremonies took place 3 weeks later. Ships from across the galaxy came to witness the transformation of the Zephyrian Empire. The process wasn't simple. There were heated debates, hurt feelings, and moments when everything almost fell apart. But Jake had taught them how to work through disagreements by focusing on shared goals instead of old grievances. The most dramatic moment came when representatives from dozens of formerly conquered worlds were invited to speak. Many of them had suffered under Zephyrian rule. Some called for revenge. Others wanted the Empire punished. But Jake stood before them all and offered a different path. "We can spend our energy on punishing the past," he said, "or we can spend it on building the future. The choice is ours." A delegate from the Altarian Republic, whose world had been conquered 50 years earlier, spoke for many when she said, "If the Zephyrians are truly willing to change, then we are willing to work with them. But they must prove their sincerity through actions, not just words." The proof came quickly. The new Confederation's first act was to offer full membership to any world that wanted to join voluntarily. They provided aid to planets that had been damaged by imperial conquests. They opened their technology and resources to help rebuild what had been destroyed. Most importantly, they began treating all beings as equals, regardless of what world they came from or what species they belonged to. The ceremony that made it all official was held in the Great Assembly Hall of the Eternal Dominion. Thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds were present. When Jake entered the hall, something unexpected happened. They all stood up. Not just the Zephyrians, but beings from every species represented. They rose to their feet as one to honor the human who had changed everything. Some of them began to kneel, as was traditional when showing respect to great leaders. But Jake immediately raised his hands. "Please," he said, his voice carrying through the hall's sound system. "Free people. Don't kneel to anyone. Stand tall and be proud what you've accomplished." Slowly, those who had begun to kneel stood back up. There was something powerful about that moment. Thousands of beings choosing to stand as equals rather than now as subjects. Queen Velara, now calling herself Velara the Wise, spoke next. 4 months ago, I captured a human and called him cute because I thought he was harmless. I kept him as a pet to amuse my court." She paused, looking directly at Jake. "I now realize that underestimating this being was the greatest mistake I ever made, and also the greatest gift I ever received." The crowd applauded, but Velara wasn't finished. "Jake Matthews taught us that true strength comes not from forcing others to obey, but from inspiring them to excel. He showed us that the best ideas can come from anyone, anywhere. Most importantly, he proved that even enemies can become friends if we're willing to listen to each other." Jake was invited to speak last. As he stood at the podium, looking out at thousands of faces from dozens of worlds, he thought about how much had changed since that terrifying day when his ship was captured. "When I was first brought before Queen Velara," he said, "I was angry and frightened. I had lost my friends, my ship, my freedom. I wanted to hate these people who had taken everything from me." The hall was completely silent. "But hatred is a choice," Jake continued, "and so is hope. I chose to try to understand rather than simply condemn. I chose to look for common ground instead of focusing on our differences. I chose to believe that even enemies could become allies if we worked together toward shared goals." He paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. Zephyrians sat next to humans. Former enemies shared tables with former conquerors. Children from a dozen species played together in the aisles. "Today, we're not celebrating the victory of one side over another," Jake said. "We're celebrating the victory of cooperation over conflict, of understanding over ignorance, of hope over fear." The applause that followed lasted for nearly 10 minutes. After the ceremony, Jake was offered many positions. He could be Earth's ambassador to the Confederation. He could lead the new organization's education programs. He could command exploration, fleets that would seek out new worlds to invite into their alliance. But Jake chose something different. He accepted the position of first mediator, someone who would travel throughout the galaxy, helping other civilizations learn to solve their conflicts peacefully. It was dangerous work, but it was exactly what the galaxy needed. His first assignment was already waiting. A territorial dispute between the Centauri Mining Collective and the Vegan Trade Union was threatening to explode into war. Both sides had agreed to let the human, who stopped the Zephyrian Empire, try to find a peaceful solution. As Jake prepared to leave on his new mission, Captain Nichell found him in his old quarters on the Eternal Dominion. The ship was being converted from a flagship of conquest into a mobile diplomatic center. "Are you sure about this?" Mitchell asked. "You could come home to Earth. You've done enough." Jake looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there were civilizations that had never learned to work together peacefully. Somewhere were beings who thought that might made right, or that different meant enemy. The galaxy is full of people who think they have to choose between victory and defeat, Jake said. Someone needs to show them there's a third option, working together to make everyone stronger. Mitchell smiled. "The alien queen called you cute. I wonder what she'd call you now." Jake thought about Queen Velara, who was working hard to transform her empire into something worthy of respect rather than fear. He thought about Kess and Nira and Thane, and all the others who had chosen hope over hatred. "She'd probably call me family," Jake said, "and that's the greatest victory of all." As the Eternal Dominion prepared to jump to hyperspace, Jake sat down to write his first report to Earth. He wanted to tell them about the wonders he had seen and the friends he had made. He wanted to describe worlds where former enemies now worked side by side building a better future. Most of all, he wanted to tell them that the universe was not as dark and hostile as they had feared. Yes, there were beings who chose conquest over cooperation, but there were also beings who were willing to change, to grow, to become better than they had been. The alien queen had called him cute because she couldn't imagine that one small human could threaten her mighty empire. She had been right about one thing. Jake had never wanted to threaten or destroy anything. He had just wanted to help people discover that they were capable of being so much more than they thought possible. And as his ship jumped toward the stars, carrying him to his next mission of peace, Jake knew that the work was just beginning. The galaxy was vast and full of civilizations that needed to learn the simple truth he had discovered, that enemies were just friends who hadn't been given the chance to understand each other yet. The human who had once been called cute was now traveling the stars, teaching the galaxy that sometimes the smallest voice could inspire the greatest changes. And everywhere he went, people stood a little taller, thought a little more freely, and dared to hope for something better than the way things had always been. The revolution had succeeded not through force, but through the simple revolutionary idea that everyone deserved dignity, respect, and a chance to contribute to a better tomorrow.